Okay, so contamination. Okay, so to start with contamination, the Florida statutes says that property for a transportation facility or transportation corridor is not subject to any liability imposed by Chapter 376 or Chapter 403 for pre-existing soil or groundwater contamination due solely to its ownership. However, we would be liable for the results of its actions if we create or exacerbate a pollution source. So the underlying text is kind of what's important. So Chapter 376 and Chapter 403 are, kind of the contamination enforcement chapters. So when we're talking about contamination, I like to think about exposure pathways. So this is how the cleanup target levels, how you know something that is contaminated. They'll come up with a concentration for a media like soil or water, groundwater. So these cleanup target levels are based off of the assumptions that they make for direct exposure and for drinking or how much groundwater somebody's drinking. They can calculate how much of a dose you could have every day from drinking the same water or from being exposed to the same soil. So in this example, there's a source of some drums, and most of the time it's a like an underground storage tank for petroleum. And this looks like it might be petroleum because it's floating on the surface of the water. But anyway, so when we build a road, and we don't want to exacerbate this, we don't want to dig up any soil that's contaminated and move it to somewhere else and cause a problem somewhere else. Alternatively, we don't want to de-water like a contaminated groundwater plume and not treat it and discharge it to some surface water somewhere else. Okay, so how do we identify and make sure that we don't exacerbate any plumes? Okay, so we start with a level 1 assessment. So the level 1 assessment is like a records review, desktop review. You could also have a field, just like a drive, like a site reconnaissance. No, we don't actually go and do any soil sampling or anything during the level 1. And you might look for photographic documentation. And then we're going to rate the potential contamination risk for each site that we find. And the ratings are no, low, medium, or high. Okay, so desktop review will review available regulatory records, including online or in-person file reviews. And we document documentation of current historical uses. So look for those documents like environmental data reports, permit information, regulatory database files, historical address information, historical aerial photos, and sandborne maps. So the field review might look like looking at FTEP and EPA comments, changes in topography from when you're looking at the aerials, such as depressions or mounds indicative of subsurface concerns, or maybe, this is a site reconnaissance, so you might be actually out there in the field looking for these things, like little mounds, visual indications of surface spills, tanks, suspicious odors, sinkholes, distressed vegetation, ventilation pipes, and drums or chemical storage containers. So when the review of the historic photos is, again, aerials and ground level photos. Maybe they would use the Google Street View or something like that, and recent photos. So risk ratings should be established for each suspected site within or adjacent to the proposed right-of-way limits, and should be completed for each design alternative. They reflect the relative degree of concern that contamination may have on the project's design, construction, or schedule. And results of the level 1 should be included in the environmental documents for the project, including a summary of the CSER. That's the contamination report. So a no rating means that you haven't found any evidence of contamination. So there's no potential for contamination to impact the project. A low rating means that there might be contamination, but you have enough information to be able to say that it won't won't impact the project. But there is contamination. And here's an example, because it's not a current facility, and they probably have, it looks like they took the building down, so maybe they've done some remediation at the site, but they know enough about the contamination there that they know their project, what they're doing for their project isn't going to be impacted by it. So it's a low rating. So a medium rating is kind of like the unknown, so it's a current operating facility, and it's not been evaluated by DEP or anything, and it might have abandoned UST sites, underground storage tanks. So this is kind of like, it's suspected, but we don't really know how it's impacting the project yet. So that's why it's recommended for further assessment in like a level 2 assessment. So here's an example of that. It's an operating facility, and it's very possible that there could be contamination. We don't know the extent of any contamination. And a high rating is that there's a reasonable potential for contamination impacts during construction based on the information and the design plans. And this should also be recommended for further assessment in the level 2. And here's an example of a high rated site. Okay, so risk ratings, the information sources for desktop review is DEP's, some of their sites, the institutional control registry will show you some sites that they've closed, but they've left contamination in place there. The contaminator locator map that's a nice reference. It has everything that the Oculus database has, but you can find things by looking at a map instead of having to know all the information about it, like the facility ID and stuff like that. You can just search by the map and find, the road that you're looking at and find the sites near it. And MapDirect is similar to Contaminator Locator Map, but it's a little bit beefier of a system. Okay. So here's some links for aerial photos and the county specific. So the county specific property appraiser website is handy to see what people are doing, or who owns, like what properties near your project. and then the Sanborn maps. Okay, so the level 1 report, the purpose of the report, so it's going to contain all these things, the purpose and need statement, the project description, the proposed improvements, the termini, the land uses, hydrologic features. It's important to know which way groundwater is flowing, for example, and the methods used to perform the level 1 assessment, a brief description of each alternative, and identification of contaminated sites on a figure or table, and ensure contaminated site information is presented in the appropriate document. So it should include a table that summarizes our findings, the contamination concerns, the contamination rating, and the distance from the right-of-way, and then any other information on each property that's adjacent to the project area. So discussion of potential contamination impacts on the project, and it'll include provide recommendation as to which alternative would have the least potential for contamination impacts. And the figures in the level 1 report will include the project location map, the land use map, and a detailed map showing all the potential contamination sites with low, medium, or high ratings. And a revised CSER may be done if enough time has elapsed or there have been plan changes. Okay, so field review. Here's just some of the things that they look for when they do a field review. The canopy, vents, dispensers, and disturbed asphalt or concrete. Maybe monitoring wells, maybe car repair bays, concrete patches. Here's a better picture of a monitoring well right on the right-of-way. And these will, if you're widening on here, then you'd have to properly abandon these monitoring wells. And here's a fuel dispenser, broken asphalt near dispenser is a problem, because then if there's a leak, or if there's a spill on the surface, it'll go down through the asphalt. And this is what underground storage tanks look like. Okay, so for the report for the SEER, it should summarize the results of the contamination screening evaluation, and the summary should answer the following questions. Are there known or potentially contaminated sites within or near the project area? How did the project avoid or minimize impact to any known or potentially contaminated sites? And are there sites that require additional investigation? So that's your medium and high rank sites would need to be listed in that part of the report. And we upload the CSER or technical memorandum as appropriate in SWEP.